Marvel Cinematic Universe has a ton of ups and downs, and I have seen every film, so I'm gonna rank them. Let's go. First up, the bad. These are some of the only films in the entire MCU lineup that I honestly don't enjoy. It shouldn't be a surprise to anyone that the Eternals takes dead last. I honestly could barely get through this film, and it took me multiple sittings. The film itself looks fine, it's just the plot takes like 2 hours to get going, and it's barely interesting the whole way through. Honestly, it's not a bad film, but considering the standards the MCU had set by this point, it was atrocious. Next up is a film so bad that they had to recast the character. Captain Marvel. Honestly, not nearly as bad of a film as everyone makes it out to be. It's not the best, and it feels kind of pointless, not to mention, I have a problem with characters like Captain Marvel that are just OP as all hell. But honestly, the film has good action scenes, some pretty decent writing. I'd say it's bad, but more on the stance of it's a good film. But again, the MCU just happens to have set really high standards. The Eternals, it's mediocre no matter how you look at it. Captain Marvel, honestly, if this was just honestly Universal, it'd probably be a pretty decent film. It just happens to be the MCU happens to have set its standards way too high, frankly. Way too high. Time to get controversial. Captain America, The First Avenger. Now, my problem with Captain America comes down to a few things. I don't care for World War II movies. I just don't find that kind of stuff interesting. And secondly, Captain America sucks. One, I'm Canadian, so I don't really care for the American values or whatever he's supposed to promote. And secondly, he's boring. Steve Rogers is, as he's painted in these films, perfect. He's framed as, this perfect human being that has the exact perfect moral compass. Everything he does is right. Nothing he does is wrong. And he's not interesting to watch because he doesn't have interesting combat. Frankly, the shield could be an interesting weapon, but wielded by a character that, frankly, doesn't do anything with it, honestly, kinda sucks. And it doesn't help the supporting cast in these films aren't that good. I'll be honest, I don't care for a lot of the supporting cast in the Captain America films. And it's extra hard when I don't care for Steve Rogers. I don't think he's a bad character. It's just, again, he's perfect. Especially in this film where there's not much of a conflict other than beat super Nazi. In later films, when he's plopped into present day, it's a bit more interesting because he has to adapt from the 1940s to the 2010s. But in this film especially, there's no reason to watch it other than a honestly pretty decent World War II movie. The meh. These are films I don't necessarily love and I don't necessarily hate. The Avengers Age of Ultron. It's sad, this film actually used a lot of characters quite well, and introduced Wanda and Vision, and immediately quote off Quicksilver and Ultron, but frankly, it's not a bad idea, it just happens to be, the execution's bad, and it also doesn't help the film, it looks awful, I'll be honest, mostly because of the problem that they tried to pretty much have an entire act of the film, have the entire set be CGI in 2012. This doesn't turn out well because I don't know, it just looks awkward because they don't have the CGI budget to do that. Ignoring the fact that this is the movie they spent the most budget on. I don't know. The film just is awkward, and I didn't really enjoy it. Hey, remember a few minutes ago where I said that the extended Captain America cast wasn't interesting? Well, it isn't. Black Widow's boring, Nick Fury's boring, Cap's boring, Bucky's boring. Yeah, I don't really care for most of these characters, huh? The problem is, I just don't like the characters that are kind of just human. And Winter Soldier, I don't understand the praise for it. It's praised as one of the best MCU films. I don't get it. It's not interesting, and it can barely stick in my mind after I watch the film. This film is carried by Tony. Like, this entire film is completely boring, aside from Tony's half of the fight. I was not once rooting for Captain America. Not because I really care about what either side wants, but solely because I don't want to root for the characters I don't care for. Captain America and his side of the war are boring. Tony's side are great. Not to mention, it introduced the swinging spider, Spider-Man himself, who is, depending on the adaptation, either my second or first favorite superhero. Not just Marvel superhero in general. I'll get into Spider-Man later once we actually get to his trilogy, but frankly, I don't care for Cap, and Civil War was entirely carried by Iron Man. And I have to knock points off if your film is being carried entirely by a character from a separate film franchise who isn't meant to be the main character. Thor and the Dark World. The film that is constantly being complained because it's too dark, when in reality, it's extremely tonally confused. Thor, the Dark World, isn't dark. It's pretty well as light as the first Thor movie. The catch is, they wanted to make the film dark, and their thought process was, let's just lower the saturation on literally everything. Like, I honestly wouldn't be surprised if in post they did actually just lower the saturation by 10%. Which, why? Generally, the film is not interesting. It's fine. And it may become better as Thor Love and Thunder releases. But in the current moment in time, it just isn't interesting. Black Panther. This is an interesting film. I don't dislike it, it just happens to not be my cup of tea. Because, again, I don't really care for the superheroes who don't really have powers. Everyone involved in the film is really talented, and I can tell they did a lot of research in representing Africa. But it's just the fact that Black Panther himself is just another Captain America, so to speak. He's just another, I have enhanced physical abilities, that's it, those are my superpowers. Like, if you replace this with something more interesting, like, it could work. And I am really intrigued to see how Wakanda Forever is going to work, especially since they have to recast the main character. And unlike the other character that's being recast for their second film that we've already discussed, people actually liked his actor. They just don't have a choice because he's dead. Which means I am intrigued to see how they go about this. And I would like to know. So, I am just more wishing we had less characters that were pretty much just human, is what I mean. The Incredible Hulk is surprisingly good. Frankly, I quite enjoyed it, and the fact that you can see the character development, and since this was actually one of the last Marvel films I watched, it ended up showing, like, I don't know, it's kind of interesting when you see character development in reverse. For example, Steven Universe did that, and what made the character very hated, I actually quite enjoyed it, because you're basically seeing a character go from their best to their worst. And I think that's neat. But the film itself is really good. Like, honestly, its CGI is surprisingly good, considering it's, like, almost 20 years old. Like, 15 now. I gotta admit, it's a film that holds up a lot better than I expected. And something that I could definitely enjoy. I don't think it's something I'm ever going to actively seek out to watch again, but it's good. I did enjoy it. Black Widow, a film that has boring characters that I don't care about, characters that don't have powers, and honestly pretty well choreographed action scenes. I'll give it that. I don't think I would have watched it outside of streaming, and I definitely would not have seen it in theaters, nor would I have paid the $50 Disney Plus asked for initially. But it's honestly not that bad of a film. And some of my complaints against it are also more just Disney doing stupid things, which shouldn't surprise anyone. The original Avengers is fine. It has some pretty dated CGI, but overall works quite well. I don't dislike it. It's definitely a good end point for Phase 1, and it just happens to be Phase 1, in my opinion, was quite strong for about half of it. Falcon and the Winter Soldier was honestly quite good. I don't like it that much, but I, again, don't care for a lot of the characters, and a lot of the topics it cover are basically the blip and then racism. I don't really have a way to connect to that, and the blip is something I really think should have been covered in one of the films, not the Disney Plus show, but that's more a problem I have with the direction. But honestly, Falcon and the Winter Soldier is surprisingly good. Ant-Man and the Wasp is quite good. I quite like the villain. It's a good film, it has its moments, and it definitely has a lot of the stuff I like about Marvel films, being the fact that they can do action really well, and then also have really great comedy, mostly through one-liners. It's a good film, and the only reason it's in the mess section is mostly because this made it feel more rounded out, when in reality, I want to put great as films I think truly are, good. And this is just good, but that and the numbering system makes more sense to start on 30 for the great, but that's more of a semantics thing. But I do quite enjoy both Ant-Man films. Next up, Ant-Man. I guess the poster's a bit small. And now it's really big. Okay, let's talk about the film. Honestly, I enjoy the film. It has, again, a lot of great moments, a lot of great action scenes, a lot of great one-liners. It's pretty well everything I like in an MCU film. And this and Ant-Man and the Wasp are quite interchangeable. This one takes the edge by half a point. Not gonna lie. The original Thor is great, it just needs a remake, so to speak, since its biggest problem is dated CGI. And I wouldn't be surprised if Disney still has copies of the original film while it was being made in production. Because frankly, if you just read the CGI in Asgard, that's pretty much my only major complaint with the film. And that's mostly because we're talking about 2010 CGI here in a live-action film, so it needs to look realistic, and it's more of the film's good, it looks beautiful, it just happens to be dated due to its time of release and its heavy focus on CGI instead of practical effects. The good. These are films I thoroughly enjoy and can definitely come back to again. Shang-Chi is a film I don't think anyone expected to be as good as it was. The film itself is beautiful and really entertaining, and has a lot of great one-liners. Frankly, it's probably one of the most underrated MCU projects, because it is really, really, really good, and just happens to be a character that no one had really heard about. I can't wait for this character and this film's cast to appear in an Avengers film, or get a sequel. I like Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. It's good, it's fun, I like the characters, I like the villain. There's nothing really not to like. It's a really solid film. It just doesn't have anything too distinct about it. Don't get me wrong, it's great, and I'm excited for Guardians 3. But it's a solidly great film. There's nothing else I can really say about it. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1. This is a film that I think will always be special to me, as it was the first MCU film I ever saw. And one of 4 that I actually saw in a cinema or theater style environment. Yeah, I haven't seen many of these films in theaters. You're welcome. But generally, it was the first Marvel film I ever saw, so it has a place in my heart for that. And it's pretty well on par with the second. I'd say the second is probably a little better, but the emotional attachment I have to the first, being the first MCU film I ever saw, means it just gets the edge because of that. Doctor Strange is really good. The character starts off very unlikable, but the characters grow on you and definitely progress throughout the film, and frankly, the film's super mega trippy, and I kind of wish I saw this in theaters in 3D, because it's disorientating enough when watching on an iPad in 1080p on Netflix. For clarification, the film was on Netflix at one point. But, yeah, it's a really interesting film, and I do like it. It's just super disorientating to watch. It's a lot better than people say it is in Iron Man 2. However, frankly, I just kind of love Tony's quips anyway, so. It's a good film, but it is a bit mixed in terms of execution, and frankly, could have used a bit more changes to the script, or less changes. Basically, it needed another draft or two. But it's still enjoyable and worth a watch. Multiverse of Madness. When it came out about a month ago now, people were saying that it's kind of mid, and it's like, the film's actually pretty good. It's not one of my favorites, but I could totally watch it again. It's fun, it has action scenes, I like the themes and recurring motif of Are You Happy? It's a good film, and I enjoyed it. It's definitely worth a watch. And again, great action scenes. And I'll be honest, I hope Wanda stays dead, because characters that are that powerful make any plot pointless. Hawkeye is something I don't think I expected to enjoy nearly as much as I actually did. Kate is a really likable protagonist, and Hawkeye himself's a great mentor character. Frankly, I like most of the characters in this show, and they chose a really grounded antagonist, which works well considering it's archery. You can't do much fancy with archery. But they can actually get away with it in this film because it ends up being more stealth espionage, since the characters are just pretty well sneaking around and trying to do what they can without being caught, because, again, archery isn't exactly the most effective weapon type. It's like my favorite sport, but it doesn't mean it's not good. What If is great. I have a friend who thinks it's more just Marvel trying to fill in the gaps of things they need to do and don't have time for or money for, but frankly, What If's a great change of pace. You can constantly see the watcher in the background, which is an amazing attention to detail, and while the episodes are very much hit or miss, I'd say a majority of them hit, and the ones that don't are usually at least interesting concepts. With one of the only episodes I don't think is interesting on a conceptual or fun level being the first one. But that's mostly just because it's a retelling of the first Captain America film, with one character switched around. But generally, the series is really cool, it's really fun, and I cannot wait for season 2. Moon Knight's great. I love it once it starts to get going. The only problem is it takes Moon Knight till around episode 5 to really get going, and considering it's a 6-episode series, that isn't very good. But Moon Knight itself is really fun. I really enjoyed it. Mark and Steven bounce off of each other amazingly, and the reveal that the two of them is just dissociative identity disorder is really good, because initially I kind of went in like, okay, Steven's the original, and then Mark was like created by Khonshu to like do the stuff as his vessel. Yet turns out that was the exact opposite of what happened pretty well. But the thing is, you kind of kept getting that build-up. You occasionally saw like movie posters which said Stephen Grant as a character. It's like, oh, wait, is Stephen not the real one? And it just, once it finally gets to that point and you're just told straight out, it's just like all the pieces come flooding together, and it's just like, oh god. Point being, Moon Knight's really fun. it has a bit lacking in action and could use a little less time to get going. But overall, I enjoyed the show. The Great. These are films and TV shows I freaking adore that are great, and I'll definitely rewatch sometime. WandaVision is great. It's really fun. It's really unique since it is basically an action film, but a sitcom. I don't really know how to describe it, but it was really fun, and I really enjoyed watching the episodes as they came out. If you can get a few episodes in, you're going to really enjoy it. It's just, once again, that starting episode or two that are kind of awkward. But it's something I do thoroughly enjoy, and debated rewatching before I saw Doctor Strange too. Loki is my favorite MCU Disney Plus show. I don't know why, it just kind of is. It's just kind of fun. It's one that I really enjoyed throughout. Again, I don't exactly know why I like it so much, but it's just really fun. I think it also might just be the core concept, similar to What If, of kind of visiting different worlds. But what if the characters are stagnant and you can't really see them grow, when Loki's still there the whole time? I don't know. It's also neat because you kind of get time travel, so you can visit previous elements from the MCU or future. And since we introduced time travel in Endgame, I'd rather have it be very streamlined and make sense like we do have it here than how it was in Endgame. Because this kind of implies, yeah, time travel's a thing in the MCU, but it isn't that big of a problem since you can't really go off the beaten path. Avengers Endgame is pretty solid. I quite like it. Maybe I hold a bit of a press against it because Iron Man's one of my favorite characters in the MCU. But I do quite like it. It's only below Infinity War, just because Infinity War is a little bit more memorable and has more moments I care about. As I was just talking about it, Avengers Infinity War. It's great. The snap's great. Honestly, it's mostly that, ending bit with the snap. That is kind of where a lot of these moments come in, but I don't know. I think it might because it's almost all of these characters' lowest point that is more interesting to me. Don't get me wrong, both these films are really good. And frankly, they pretty well should be considered the same film. And I'm surprised that Disney hasn't released, a director's cut, which is just these two films stitched together with maybe a bonus, scene after the credits. But frankly, it's a really good film. I really like it. I don't know, it's just something I did enjoy. It's a case of, it's a good film, and I think seeing all these characters at their lowest pretty well is one of the greater moments. Some of the only characters that have a lower point, in my opinion, are Spider-Man, Wanda. Basically, the characters that have had even worse happen to them in a subsequent film, but most of them, I think, is losing all of their loved ones. Because obviously, those who died in the snap, for example, didn't really lose anything. Spider-Man... wrong poster. Spider-Man Far From Home is honestly, really, 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 really great. We're officially into the films I really like. I like this being the only film that actually kind of discusses the blip. And other general things, just stuff. The action scenes, But I think it's kind of hard when your monsters and enemies are literally just giant CGI elemental blobs to do anything else with them. But, frankly, it's the emotional core at the film that is where it gets. Although, I don't understand why Peter got rid of, Edith. I don't understand that. But, frankly, it's a good film, and I'm always going to have a soft spot for this one, as it was the first Marvel film I saw in theaters. Kinda. Again, it depends if we're counting a weird theater thing in a cruise ship. But it's what I'd count as the first one I saw. Thor Ragnarok. Honestly, it's really good. I think it also helps with some of the subversions. Like how the entire Thor series, Thor refers to himself as Thor, son of Odin. And then they use that within the opening moments of the movie to subvert a joke. And it's great. I'd say the joke, but it involves a swear word. And it's not one you can really replace. And I don't swear on this channel. But, honestly, it's a really good film, and it's chock full of great lines. I've been falling for 30 minutes! Honestly, there's so many, just generally great moments in this film. Some pretty fun action. And this is pretty much the only reason I'm excited for Thor Love and Thunder. Which, considering how long it takes me to make a video, especially when I'm reviewing nearly 40 films, who knows? Thor Love and Thunder may have released, a year ago now. And if it did, what do you guys think of it? But, point being, it's a good film, and I did quite enjoy it. Iron Man. Yeah, this is how you start a franchise as big as the MCU, and frankly, I can see why it did so well, because this film is fantastic. Especially considering Marvel had scraps of characters to work with that they didn't sell off. But that's a whole nother story for a whole nother day that I will never tell, and you can Google it yourself. But, generally, this film is great. Honestly, I think it's just Tony as a character. He's so snarky, so, I don't know, I love him. Robert Downey Jr. does such an amazing job as this character. And I really enjoy it, and all the moments he has on screen. So, I don't know. I don't have much to say, but it's a really fun film. It's really great. Great way to start the film series. And its biggest problem is definitely its dated CGI, but this film released in 2008, what do you expect? Iron Man 3, taking the third spot, ironically enough. This film is honestly really fun. It's a perfect conclusion to Tony's arc, in a way. Despite this being pretty much the beginning of Phase 2, and Tony had an arc throughout the rest of that, and the rest of Phase 3. Okay, point being, this is honestly a really good conclusion to his arc, and just kind of letting him, I don't know how to explain it. Point being, the film's honestly really fun, and I do really enjoy it. It's just not something I can really explain why I enjoy. But when I mean perfect, great end to his arc, I guess this is kind of his first arc. It properly ends with Age of Ultron, but it's more the Tony that the trilogy has compared to the Tony that the rest of the MCU has, if that makes any sense. Spiderman Homecoming is amazing. Turns out having my two favorite superheroes pretty much have the main roles in a film ends up turning into a really good film. Who would have thought? I don't know, but the dynamic and replacing Uncle Ben with Tony just works so much better. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be mean. It just happens to be, I don't know, it just kind of got repetitive. Let's be honest. Considering the first film in both Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield Spider-Man are pretty much the same film with minor differences. I don't even say that to be, mean or bothersome or anything like that. That's just honestly how I feel. The films aren't that unique. So, having this to make the films, different, really, really, really works in its favor. Not to mention the characters are great. It's a great introduction to all these characters. We skip over my least favorite part of Spider-Man films. The origin story for the umpteenth time. Frankly, I think the best way it's ever been done is Into the Spider-Verse, since it pretty much just goes, I'm Spider-Man. I got ridden by a bit of I cannot speak. But, that's pretty much the best way, because it kind of just goes through all the points. But this film's really great. It's really fun. Its only problem is its underwhelming villain. As a surprise to absolutely no one, Spider-Man No Way Home gets first place. Look, if you've heard people praise this film, it's because it's true, and the film is great. It's amazing. It deserves pretty much all the praise it gets. And I don't say this as someone who thinks the film is perfect. I don't. It's not even my favorite Spider-Man film. As I've probably made it clear earlier in this view, I freaking adore Into the Spider-Verse. But No Way Home is the reason I still think theater should be kept around. It is the first film I saw in theaters since it closed, and the last film I saw in theaters was the Sonic movie. So, interesting gap between films, going from Sonic movie to Spider-Man, but this film is amazing. I love it. It's great. It's definitely one I really want to rewatch sometime soon, and I intend to rewatch. If it's thrown on Disney Plus or Netflix or a streaming service I own. Frankly, I really want to rewatch it, but I don't want to rent it. I'm going to be honest. Point being, Spider-Man No Way Home is really, 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 really good. It was a near perfect enough ending to Peter's arc, especially since it was supposed to be the end, since Tom Holland's contract ran out after one more film, being a team-up movie. So, frankly, it's amazing that we're even getting more, considering how annoying Sony is to work with, apparently. So, having another 3. Although I'm surprised they didn't try to introduce Miles at the end of this film. But that's more of a weird speculation thing than an actual complaint or problem I have with the film. It's more just weird that they don't try to introduce basically the replacement for Peter in case they can't continue Tom Holland's contract. But, frankly, this film was amazing. This film was great. All the villains are great. All of them are fun. All are even better than they were in their original films. I had to binge through every previous Spider-Man film a week before this film came out because I was procrastinating. Point being, this film was great. Oh yeah, I was also playing Security Breach at the time. That was a busy week. A game that's completely confusing and makes no sense and is a labyrinth, and 15 Spider-Man films. That's fun. But this film's great. The only complaint I have with it is it requires way too much homework. I genuinely think 7 films of homework that aren't in the MCU. And then, since it's equal to the MCU Spider-Man films, there's another 2. And since Spider-Man appears in Civil War, Infinity War, and Endgame, those are there, but you can't watch Civil War without the Captain America films and the Iron Man films prior, and you can't watch Infinity War and Endgame without the prior Avengers films, which require you to watch every other prior movie. Point being, you pretty much need to watch every prior Marvel movie to fully enjoy this film. And 7 Spider-Man films. So, is it a good film? Yes. Is it worth watching all the crap you need to get through? And I'm not even saying this, because I do enjoy most of the stuff you have to watch. But the thing is, the Eternals comes before this. Are you really gonna watch the Eternals to watch Spider-Man? I mean, it's not important, but, you know what I mean. Point being, despite being an amazing film, its biggest flaw is homework. which you should never have to do homework to watch a movie. Especially if that homework is like 50 films. Oh god, no. What did you guys think? Did you enjoy these films? What are your rankings? Leave them in the comments below. See you guys in the next one.